We're back with the Sports Sense podcast. Today we're talking about Lenzerheide. I got Reese, I've got Ross. Let's get right into it. All right. So kicking things off here, the track. I really think today, or during the race, that the top section made the difference, both with the women's and the men's. Ross, do you have anything to add to that right away?
Not really. I feel like that section had it looked like it had some of the less supported turns and off-camber sections, so potentially that might be a reason why that played a role.
Yeah, so similar. I think it was cool to see that, especially that top section of the track has shown, I think, some of the rewards of different styles. We've been blazing up Jackson for this whole season so far, which is well deserved, but this showcased some people who are a little bit more planted and low to the ground, deliberate, and maybe not so high intensity with their style were rewarded in that top section quite consistently. So that was pretty cool to see, people like Lucas Shaw, and obviously Lowick and Amaury making up lots of time in that top bit.
Yeah, it definitely seemed like one of those sections where people were making these big gaps, and some races were doing something, maybe something completely different than others. And it's not like it was the only part of the race that mattered, but if you didn't get the top section right, if you weren't in that top percentage of riders in there, then you weren't in the race, is what it seemed like. One of the cool things to watch was Tahnee. She absolutely crushed it up there. Reese, you had some thoughts on her actual body position and her technique through that section of the course.
Yeah, I think it just stood out to me. I watched the replay again this morning just to see what else popped up, not in the heat of the excitement. And she's just really adopting a much more aggressive, but also, I would say, efficient position with their bodies, especially if you look at that first right-hander. She's coming in quite tall, and you can see she's tall in her legs, but she's quite low in her chest, which is not traditionally a style we've seen from riders, especially in the women's field. So she's starting to show that the gym training is paying off for sure, but taking a bit of a different approach with that taller leg, a bit more of a hinge at the hip, getting her chin really far over the stem. And you watch the speed she leaves that corner with. She's not done a psychotic pumping movement, but she just had a really straight, strong leg braced against that tight berm, and then ejecto cedo cuz out the other side super fast. So I think that kind of thing is what's made a really big difference for her, starting out those splits really fast. So being efficient with her position is giving her that consistency across the season, but also just maybe that little bit of an edge because she's managing her fitness on a track like this one that turned out to be a bit more physical than I think a lot of the riders found.
Yeah, you could almost see the fatigue in the riders as they were getting down to the bottom of the course. It's super fatiguing course despite it being that more bike park style. Tahnee absolutely crushed it. If you looked at the men's field, there were a couple of loose units through that top section. Watching Ronan's run, he was dirt was going everywhere. He was absolutely blowing up berms. It was awesome to see. But then Jackson too, right before his fall, he was the fastest through that section. Ross, his technique, I wanted to ask you about this. Jackson's got that little bit of chaos right now, and he's kind of right on the limit. And what do you think about that?
Well, I think he's got so much confidence in his skill set that I think he backs himself, I think, to be able to maybe even take a bit of a risk here or there, knowing that his skill set is so refined that if he gets a little bit offline, if he gets a little bit out of center, he can regain it. I thought it was interesting this race because I think that a good old steep shoot is a really cool one because of the steepness, you're not having to generate speed. It's purely a matter of how early am I willing to get off the brakes, how fast am I willing to go into the steep section, and then at what point do I choose that I'm going to slow down. And I think the key thing for me on that section for him was It didn't appear that the bottom of that chute had a really well-supported berm for him to really use his cornering skills. And I think that could have been his undoing, in that he maybe took a risk in that point. But because what met him at the bottom was a lot harder to deal with, more of a compression glancing right over a route in onto sort of off camber section of trail, that might have been a risk too far in this sense.
And I think too, to comment on like watching the fall there, it's like anybody who's watched a lot of downhill, it's not going to be one little mistake that causes it. It's kind of like you see the like snowball effect of all of the mistakes up until he falls. He gets like the one slip, and then the body position's a little bit out, and then it's like 1, 2, 3, really quick, and then he's off the bike. Reese, any thoughts on it, like Jackson's style? Like I guess a more specific question is like, where is it coming from for him? Like, where is it coming from for Jackson? Like, how is he putting himself? Is it a body position? Is it like from his feet? Is it from his like hips? Like, what's he doing?
Well, I think, like we've discussed in the past, he's a smaller rider, so he's making the most, and his skill set's probably been developed over years and years as a smaller rider. So to keep up and generate speed, he's got to be very active and manage pressure super well, like put force into the bike to accelerate where other riders could probably just brace because they're heavier. So because of that style, he's had to be that type of active. So he's kind of doubled down on it, which I think is sick. But what we're seeing now is like the pros and cons of any style. Like there's going to be pluses and minuses, and one of the pluses is when it works, it's very, very fast. One of the downsides is it's super precise. So if you're off by even a small margin, the consequences are potentially higher. And I think that's what we saw there, is it kind of like jumped in a little bit to the top. He maybe braked a little bit late, or was on the brakes a little bit long, which kind of caught him up in that hole, dislodged the body position, and so on. So if he was like half a bike length on the brakes earlier, which is a very precise amount of time, like that's a fraction of a second at the speed he was going, right? So if he had that tiny bit earlier, it would have been all reward, and he would have shot up on that high line like he was doing before and probably made up a bunch of time. So I think the sick part about this is that we're seeing the pros and cons, and when it works amazingly well. But he's got to be so precise to be able to do that time and time again, and that's what makes mountain biking so exciting, because tracks are
either that, or he has to be precise, or the track has to have an ample margin for error built into it, in a sense, as in, is there space or support down trail to mitigate a mistake? And I don't think there was in that situation.
Agreed. And similarly, like, does the track have a whole bunch more opportunities to risk it, or like find those moments? Because Lenzerheide's a short, punchy track, like it's a sprint, right? And traditionally margins super tight. So if he let's say, like hypothetically, he stayed on but made that bobble, like to Ross's point, if there was 5 more sections with big margins potentially in there, he might have done like 3 more things that would have clawed that time back. Obviously came off in this instance, so we're playing what if, but I think that's a really cool point as well, is like, do certain tracks allow for that, like a bit more high risk style because of the support, because of the weather, because of the length of the track, the width of the track? Probably. And then these super precise tracks require a lot more precision, because there's not a lot of opportunities to claw it back later if you do make that mistake. And I think we saw that a lot, especially in the women's field. Like Tahnee had that one big bobble in the middle, but other than that was like quite consistent. And it only took like, one hiccup from a bunch of the other contenders to just go, oh, you're half a second back, or you're second back now, because of the speed and the nature of that track.
So, what Jackson's doing out there, him versus Loic right now, something I've found pretty interesting over the last little bit is that a lot of the winners coming out of these last few World Cups, or a lot of the top performers, are kind of in the middle of the field. That makes me think of the mental game it makes me think of guys throwing down a run and then other guys looking at it and going like, oh, I actually have to really put one down here if I want to put myself on the podium or in the top 10 or whatever it is. But Loic versus Jackson, classic rivalry at this point. What are we seeing in the mental game from these guys? Ross?
Yeah, I think it's really rad. I think you've got a younger rider who's clearly in a phase who's potentially changing the sport in the way of riding, certainly for the way, you know, his body type at least. And then you've got the kind of wily veteran who's done it all, won it all, like one of the best to ever do it, especially when it comes to under pressure moments. And it almost seems like Loic is kind of leaning into that mental aspect because he knows that that's going to be his biggest strength. He has wisdom on his side with many more years of racing at this level. Jackson, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out because Jackson's won way more, but he's basically won or come like quite far down the pack, aside from one second place. So he's either done phenomenally well, he's either made it on the podium, or he's had basically what is a throwaway result in terms of the points. Whereas Loic, I think, has been pretty much inside the top 10. I think you'd maybe have to correct me on that, the whole way through. So every round he's made, he's actually been making points that are going to build his base for his overall. So it's pretty rad to see. And even this week, it was really cool because you know for a fact that Loic will have known what happened to Jackson in his race run. And I wonder if that played a role into how he raced it, because he did look like it was a very safe run. I don't know if that was planned or not. I don't know what you think, Reese.
That's what I was going to ask. Do you think Loic was pulling punches there at the end? But look, I think he's smart enough that it was a factor. I also think he's a competitor enough that he's not going to not try to do well. Like he also knows he needed points, so he wasn't going to just fully chill mode. But I think he's so experienced, like he's saying, such a vet that he rode a 90% run, and he trimmed off like 8% of his intensity because he knew there wasn't really much point, like other than obviously they always want to win, but for him, especially this, I think, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but this late in his career, like you said, he's done everything. He's about to have a kid, you know, there's some other things going on where he's probably like, oh, finishing with an overall this year would probably be pretty wicked way to like not hang it up, because I don't think he's hanging it up, but I think to just go, sweet, I can settle into next season with nothing to prove and just like go like enjoy almost the back nine and like have a fun time and race. Like I don't have anything left to prove.
Right.
One of the winningest and just go. So I think that overall is a priority. So I think it probably did impact that run for sure.
I guess overall in the downhill world, like where does that overall World Cup land compared to being a world champion, or you know, having a bunch of race wins, or like where does that land for you guys, Reese?
I think it's, to me, I think it's the biggest. World champs is sick, and I think that's right there. But to be that consistent and finish overall in the world at the end of the year, especially this year with the, like, is this the most races we've had in a season ever?
I think
So to be that, you're like, I think, to me, this is my just personal opinion, I think that's the truest form of a world champion. Like you were the best across a whole season consistently. You're the best downhill mountain bike racer in the world, as far as I'm concerned. World champs, you are the champion of the world on that day. So I think that's the difference in my head. What do you think, Ross?
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, I think there's probably a different mindset that goes into it because you know, world champs is, like you say, it's on the day. So it's, can you bring that intensity on the day? And many of the riders will admit to it's just a win it or bin it kind of mentality. What I think what was really impressive this year was the fact that Jackson won and he's in the title fight for the overall. Like that's super like impressive that he was willing to put a run down like that while still, not risking his overall title chances. So, but I feel like for me though, I don't necessarily love it if a World Cup overall is won, but the winner doesn't win a race. That's maybe a different caveat. So yeah, but over a long season, if the winner comes out on top, wins a few races, but also is super consistent, for sure, that's a sign that they're the best all-round downhill mountain bike racer in the world.
Yeah, and the point system really does seem to sort of reward consistency over just purely winning.
I'd be curious to know what the brands or the sponsors' bonuses are for World Cup overall versus World Champs versus race win.
Yeah, I'd have to say that the consistency. I think the consistency factor in downhill is much more difficult than the one-day win World Championships, in my opinion. But
although if you were to ask Aaron Gwynn that, he might have a different story.
yeah, exactly.
Or PT for all those years where, he won several World Cup overalls and for whatever reason wasn't able to. Well, he got it in the end, but yeah, I think it depends who you'd ask, right? Like, and maybe it is that those riders who have that blazing out and out speed. Maybe they have more chance of world champs generally. But then again, I feel like Aaron Gwynn had blazing speed. So
I think you're right. It's totally how you get there. Like if you've been the world champs person and you're like the one run win or Bennett person, all you'd probably want is the consistency to win an overall. And then if you've won a bunch of overalls, you'd probably be like, God, I just knew I want to win races and I want to win world champs. And same thing, I don't think it would still be amazing. Not that I've ever been close to figuring this out, but if you won the overall without winning a single race, I think you'd also be a bit gutted as well. Like that would feel weird is at the same time. So I don't know, unless you were on the podium like every race or something. But yeah, I do think there's a lot in how you get there, which I mean ultimately is the coolest part about this sport, right? Is there's so many variables that impact these single races, let alone the whole season and world champs. So much going on as a fan to just like froth out about.
Yeah. And then this race too, Piron with the win. So he put down that time like kind of in the middle of the field, like with I think 26 something like that riders to go. I guess his sort of like he just looked solid through the entire course and actually wasn't the fastest through any of the sectors. Was there anything that you guys saw him doing? I'll start with you, Ross. Was there anything that you saw him doing that you were like, he's nailing it today?
I just think when Amaury's on, like, I mean, he's just so relentless. He's so powerful. And the strength he showed in one of the clips there, where near I think it was the bottom third, where his front wheel went into a hole, and then he just got pitched forward. But because he's always in a really strong position, and he's very strong, mere mortals would have just got thrown over the front in that moment. Myself included, I'd imagine. But yeah, just that physicality of being so strong but committed over the front of the bike. I mean, I think the reality as well is, to be able to ride in that way at that speed, you have to be in good condition. And I think that's something that can play a role, is that physical performance factor. As well as the skill in that moment there. I think, there's probably no one better in the field when they get it right than Amaury in terms of that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it kind of trickles back to the mental game thing for me a little bit. Like, and an idea that's been going on in my head for a little while is like slow in the mind, fast on the ground, or like fast on the bike, which is, I think what he did well was like with all this seasonal pressure, with all the other things going on, your mind's racing, and we know our body doesn't work as fast as our brain, right? Like that's not possible. So if you're thinking too quickly or too much, your timing is more likely to be out for those types of situations. And I think that's maybe a little bit what happened to Jackson. Obviously, you don't want to say this in blacks and whites because he's like the best and mistakes happen. That's like the incredible thing about the sport. But I think probably just a lot of factors weighing on him overall, this, and this. And he's probably just like a tiny bit quick in his mind, maybe, and rushing a tiny little bit. And that's, I mean, urgency is required, but a little bit too much urgency causes those. That's a fraction of a second error, but that's what that is. And I think that's what Amaury did super well, was very deliberate when he was choosing to be very active and putting that force into the bike. And he was very deliberate about when he was just like managing forces of the trail. So if you watch his run, there's like big moments of like commitment, and then there's a lot of maintaining. So I think that ultimately was what did it for him. He even said, he's like, oh, I could have went faster, but the people who tried to push it faster made big errors, which didn't allow them to win. And that's why he won, because he probably didn't go as fast as he could. That's like what sort of saved him. And that's not going to work on every track, and it's not going to work every day, but there's a little bit of that irony where, yeah, mentally, if you're too stimulated, there's too much going on and you're rushing, it actually makes you ride slower.
And he's also mentally free of being in a title fight. Yeah. So he's just after race wins now, and that's got to be quite nice.
And he's 4 weeks off a broken collarbone, let's remember. So he's only just broken his collarbone a month ago or whatever it was, 6 weeks ago. Yeah, and so he probably had no expectations. He was just like, I'm going to go do my best with my recovering collarbone and have like a good, like fast, smooth run and see where I end up.
Yeah, there's one thing I think, even if, you know, for the non-coaches, watching Amaury, you're still like, when he's on it, he looks fast. You're just like, man, he's crushing it out there. That's what I was thinking the whole time. Was also cool to see him tie Sam Hill. I think it was 14 World Cup wins. Tied Sam Hill for that record, or that tally of wins.
I think the other part of this mental game that is present, that's maybe a little bit underlying, is this new system and the team's aspect. I know some of our juniors are working through it, but just in general, it's like the pressure to get a ride next season is higher than it's ever been, because if you don't get that ride, there's no guarantee you're racing all the races. So either second year juniors, first year juniors, or like those up and coming riders, or if you're just on the YT mob, anyone who needs a ride next year, contracts up this season, which is probably a ton of people, because I don't think many people were dishing out like 4 or 5 year contracts in the last 2 years. So a lot of people probably looking for a ride, and I think that's a factor as well. If you're not in the fight for the overall, you need to make a splash in these next 3 rounds or 2 rounds left, because yeah, if you can throw a podium in or a win in, that might be the difference between a few grand on your contract. It might be the difference between racing next year and racing your national series next year instead, you know? So I think that factor was definitely very present. And you see, like, I don't think this is what happened to Pinkerton, but like, I think all that like noise and pressure is what causes like a goofy error like that, right? His head was a little further down the track and something happened. It's not his fault, probably, just one of those things. But I think those external factors are what have caused a lot of that, because it wasn't just him. Like, we saw Troy riding pretty erratic, and he's like the smoothest rider historically out of the gate. You know, people are pushing it. I think for whatever reason, this Lenzerheide race had like crazy energy about it, which caused lots of bobbles and really intense racing. And that could just be because it's like that sprint type of track. It could be the end of the season, could be overalls, could be all these factors. But I think because of just what's happening in the sport right now, there was just a lot of buzz, like a lot of little
So Reese, you touched a little bit on Pinkerton's crash here, and so I just want to take a look at it and actually break it down from how much time he potentially lost. And I think a lot of people were wondering how close would he have been because he started to bring some time back on Piron towards the end of the race. And so just taking a look at the crash here, 5 or more seconds lost in that first little bit. Jumps back on the bike. This is a race though, so it's difficult for us to totally look at, how much time could he have lost there versus the momentum. And, there's a ton of different factors we have to take into consideration. But if you go into the first point that we see him on the track in the UCI feed, and you compare him to Amaury, he's about a second slower through that first section up until that point. But then he brings it back. All things considered, from the start of looking at this, he's lost over 5 seconds at the start, and then looking at where he finished at the very end, there's maybe a case that Pinkerton could have won this race. And Ross, what do you think of that?
Yeah, pretty wild. I mean, it's hard to think, where his head's going to be at right now, and my mind thinks like if I was in the role of like a team sort of manager, or if he has a riding coach, what do I say to that? I think the only thing you can do is say, hey man, you rode the best race of your life, down pretty much all the track, and you just happen to have a weird thing happen at the start that you'll never make that mistake again. So yeah, I think it's been coming. I mean, he's been kind of like, pretty high up there in a lot of the, time training and stuff like that, but he's just not managed to put it together, or even get through to kind of the finals a couple of times. But, I think he's definitely one of those riders probably that Reese is alluding to, he's definitely a younger talent, ton of promise, but hasn't had, so many like highlight results yet. But I think honestly, in the eyes of any team managers or personnel, they're going to look at that and go, well, that guy has clearly got the pace. He's had a fairly traumatic learning moment. So that's only, I think that's only going to make him stronger moving forwards.
Yeah, I could agree more. I mean, for me, I didn't go into the nitty gritty, I won't lie, but if you look at like he lost 5 seconds out of the gate and he was like 4.9 seconds off the win, I would say definitely could have won the race. Like, I think that's super clear. I love that though. Like, that part of racing in my mind is so fun, where it's like, for whatever reason, when people have a crash and they just like throw caution to the wind, and all of a sudden this is like this most psycho riding. So would he have been able to do that same run had he not blundered at the beginning? Don't know. We're never gonna know. But I think that's such a cool part again, is he just went like, well, fuck it. we're going for it now, because he's just probably pissed. And you've seen things like that before where people have clawed it back pretty well, or broke a chain out of the start gate famously, or win and stuff like that, where it's just like when you gotta Hail Mary, sometimes it really brings the best out in people. And I definitely think there was an aspect of that, but he also showed that he had that pace anyway. So anything could have happened. I think at the end of the day, I'd just be packaging this as a win for him. Like, dude, you won the part of the track you rode. You just doofed it in the start. So let's take that. Like, you are a World Cup winning pace right now. Let's take that to the next race. We leave behind the start gate. Maybe we'll practice that a couple of times, and but, like, let's just leave that part behind and keep the part that makes sense, or the part you should focus on, which is the fact that you're at World Cup winning pace right now. Undoubtedly, whether that was the one or not, you've got it. So let's just keep going.
I think the other interesting thing to bring up with this is, like, I wonder how many riders are in a similar thing where basically they have the riding skill and pace to actually do that, but what is the limiting factor for them is how they deal with the race day stress, or the in the moment, how's their mind either help or hinder them in a race run. Like,
Yeah, the thing with this sport as well is there's a bit of this culture of riders falling and people saying, "Oh, think about how fast they could have been." You know, take that's the classic Sam Hill greatest run of all time. He fell and came second um, in Champery back in whatever it is in the 2000s, and so I can guarantee you the Pink Bike forums will be going off with this one saying Pinkerton could have won the race. You know, it's part of the culture, and we're going to continue to hear about it, I think.
Well, I mean, we jumped on it straight away too, didn't we? So. Dude, yeah.
I had half my notes were about Pinkerton falling on this thing.
Yeah.
That's the sickest part is the variation in performances from the top level riders in mountain biking are and always have been fairly varied. Like what's the most anyone's ever won is 3 in a row ever. That's crazy. So I can't think of another sport where there's more variables that are constantly changing than downhill mountain biking in terms of like how you're going to perform. Because like if you're, surfing is another one that's crazy because you're waiting for the ocean, but like you you only got to beat the same people in those same conditions. So at least it's like that's somewhat controlling that variable, whereas
it's judged.
Yeah, and it's judged, and most of the time that's the case for mountain biking. But if you're 20th and then you're dropping last, that course is different somewhat than before if it rained, whatever. So I think all those factors is why it's now become an art because there's too many scientific factors involved, and managing those is what is the art of it, I think, because one day it might be your mental game, but maybe your bike doesn't feel good and that impacts how your brain feels, which impacts your skills on the bike. Maybe physically you kind of feel like shit. So, and those factors are not purely independent, right? Like they all work together, and you might just go rail a corner you love to get your mind back in a good place to then go perform, or vice versa. You might have to eat like your favorite meal to get back to a place where you're psyched so that you feel better. So then your brain can feel better, which helps you implement your skills better. So it's a never-ending puzzle, I think.
And Reese, I think you're doing a great job of summing it all up and talking about all of the different things that go into it. But really, sometimes it's just about keeping it simple. Focus on some key factors. This time we're going to this first recurring segment that we're going to do is the performance affecting factor of the day, or the PAF of the day, let's call it. The PAF of the day. And so we're going to go around and talk, take a turn. Each of us is going to take a turn, basically talking about the performance affecting factor. I'll kick things off. So I think the big performance affecting factor of the day was Amaury's bike setup. So I'm saying bike setup as the performance affecting factor. He had a higher pressure in the back, no insert in the back tire. He's also apparently running a heavier bike. So maybe that played a factor. I think this, we're dealing with such slim margins. If people are riding on the day at their best and everyone's riding in the best, let's call it the top 5, I'm going to say that Amaury's bike setup was what made the difference for him today.
Yeah, I like it. And I think that's so fair also because of it was pretty dry and slippery. And the course was like we've said so far, it's kind of a sprint where it's shorter time and distance, but it was pretty full on throughout the whole thing. So having a planted and bike that works well to build that confidence, I think is sweet. I think, to be clear, the other performance affecting factors: bike setup, mental game, physical fitness, and bike handling skills. So what's yours PAF of the race, Ross?
I got to go with the mental, honestly. Like the mindset of how you approach that race, and I feel like it's pretty individual. Like we saw, potentially Jackson, whether it was a conscious decision to push, or it was a subconscious one, I don't know. Or maybe it evolved throughout the run based on stuff that had happened higher up that made him have a switch in the brain to go, I need to push here. And then, or, Amaury being a bit more free to ride, just not with pressure for the overall. Like you said, Ryan Pinkerton being almost freed of any sort of pressure, crashing in the first, pedal stroke. Yeah, I think, for me, mental. I mean, it's a pretty easy one to kind of like almost define what that means for any given rider. But that's what I pick, and I wouldn't be surprised if you pick something similar, honestly.
Yeah, I almost want to pick something different now because you stole mine. But that would be my first. That was my first instinct, was the mental game, primarily because of the intensity of the track, and I think finding that balance of how hard to push was going to be the biggest challenge, because the track is gnarly. Like, there's no doubt about it. I want to get reamed on the internet again for saying downhill track aren't hard, but thanks everyone for that. But it is a gnarly track, but it isn't for these guys and girl. It's a high intensity track though, high speed, very active. So I think finding that limit and that sweet spot and trusting yourself and not kind of getting baited into pushing too hard, which we saw from a lot of people, was going to be the big difference maker. And I think that's why you saw a pretty big shake up in your usual top 10, or not a big shake, but like there was some different names up there, which was cool. And I think that would have impacted the ability to apply bike skill. I think bike setup, I agree. I think that was a sick one too.
I think though as well, like the thing to qualify the mental side is that the mental side will impact the skills quite dramatically. For example, if you're feeling sort of more mellow, then that will result likely in a bit more of a composed output of your skills potentially. Whereas if you have a rushing mindset, like you said before, Reese, then that'll show up in the skills of maybe being impatient at times, being erratic with your movements, and therefore that will affect the physical actions of your skills, whether it's your timing of your braking, movements of your body.
And I think the one probably wasn't at the top of the pile, but was a real, like, the physical side. We heard a little bit of chatter, like Amaury said in one of his interviews. So I was cooked at the bottom. I thought more people were going to make some time, and I think we did see that. Like Nina was out by 0.06, and it was only in those bottom corners. So that could have been a factor, like a bit of fitness. I think she had a bit of commentary about that a few races ago. Like, she was still coming back from something else, so she didn't quite have the fitness she wanted. I don't know. But they all, of course, are factors. That's why they're in the path heading. But they, I agree. I think the mental side, followed by bike setup, was pretty fair for this one.
All in all, bit of a weird day on the course. I think the mental game played a factor. I think that, a lot of times that we thought people were going to take the hot seat, there was like weird spots where they lost time. It was a really unpredictable day overall, I would say, but that just adds to the drama. Okay, let's clip to. I'm gonna show you guys the clip of Lockie.
Scrubs.
Oh no! Okay. Oh yeah.
Oh,
yeah, that one,
It's
yeah.
like,
Dude, so sick. I think if you rode that trail as a normal part of the bike
There's
park,
an S bend.
S bend, and they just obviously straight lined it.
Oh,
And he flipped off
yeah.
the end of the right hander, then there's a whole other left hander, then a roller, and he's gone.
Because if you had regular punters going straight, they wouldn't have the move to absorb, like, or pre-jump, like.
Totally. And I don't think that that's one of those ones where everyone's walking around that bike park now being like, where did he jump from? What's going on?
Yeah.
But it's just like, it's that little surprise too, where you're just like, oh, it like gets you, you're like, I can't believe he did that. That's sick. Yeah, it's love, like, to see the guys like this together.
I mean, there's a lot of flat landing going on. like on that one, when people didn't do what he.
Yeah, so a lot of flat landing happening, but on that jump prior to that, that's like one of the bigger jumps, the one that ASAP backflipped in qualifying. A lot of people scrubbing it, but like one thing I wanted to ask you guys here, Reese, I'll let you go first with this, but when you're scrubbing, like what's the anatomy there? Like how are you, like what's the process of scrubbing, and like um on a jump that's of that size, and what are you thinking kind of going into it?
Well, I suppose if we break it down, like the point of a scrub, other than to look sick and impress people, is
Get
you're
sideways.
basically trying to apply as many planes of movement to absorb that upward force that's coming at you from that lip more effectively, right? So if you just absorbed it in a vertical plane of movement, you're gonna get a limit. There's a limit to that range of movement. You can absorb force laterally. So by doing this, you can see by doing that, I've made my bike come up. So you can absorb laterally, and you can absorb rotationally as well by twisting that back wheel out of the way. So in a very precise sequence of movements, by starting to absorb, then angling the bike, then rotating the bike in succession, you're maximizing your range of movement to absorb as much force as humanly possible. And that's why the more they lean over and the more they rotate, the lower they're able to stay within that vertical plane.
Yeah, that answers it like super well. That was like the best description ever.
R-
Ross, do you have anything to
Reese.
add?
I was just gonna ask Reese where he would rank high a scrub that is basically a must-do move. Where would you rank that in terms of the sort of like harder things to do in mountain biking?
I feel like that's one of those ones where like everyone can do it to like 80%, but then the people who are really good at it, it's like a superpower almost. Like Bass, Van Steenbergen comes to mind, obviously like Finn. All the like most of these guys can do it really, really well. But Dave McMillan, same. They like when you can really get completely laterally sideways, compressed, and rotated, it requires an insane amount of bike control and balance. So I think it's hard to rank in importance relevant to other things. I would say it is one of the biggest things that I feel separates like really good or like low level pros from the best. Like it's in or that skill set anyways, to be able to do things like that, because it's like very elite timing combined with maximal movement in multiple planes all at the same time.
Yeah, it's a pretty high tariff move, because even just the mentality of the when you would do it to the absolute maximum amount is when you absolutely need to do it, because if you don't do it, you're literally missing the landing.
You're gonna eat shit for sure. You're either gonna
mistime it and you don't do and your bike connects, happens to have weight through it and up the lip, then you're getting ejected over the front. So
bingo. Yeah, exactly. And that's why most people do it really well to 80%, because if you mess it up, you're probably still gonna survive. But if you go beyond that, like 80-ish% to those situations like you're talking about, it's like that high speed on that much consequence, you're probably gonna have a real bad time.
There's a video that I saw. This would have been like a couple of years ago, but it was of Finn. It's cool that you mentioned him, Reese. And it was this Red Bull video, I think, of him on his vlog or something. And it was a like scrub for show and scrub for dough was his like the way he presented it. And so you can scrub and be like, look sick and get sideways. And then he showed how to actually scrub to make it faster. And it's like, two very distinct ways of doing things. And with the scrub for fast or dough being much more difficult.
Yeah, I think the thing with that one as well is I think you actually have to try and move your mass so that it's actually kind of trying to be moving down, which is what brings the lip into play so much, and that's why it's so potentially hazardous.
Yeah, and you're also letting it hang out there from the rotational perspective. So like on a for show version, you like want your back wheel up above your head and sideways, but obviously your bike moving sideways forwards isn't going to be the fastest move. There's a bit of wasted energy there on the show version. So I think that's like the precise difference on those ones is like it's leaving the bike hanging out for show, whereas in a race, they're not going to let it get out that far and they're going to bring it back much more quickly.
So I guess like
have we
I did want to ask
removed
you guys about this. If you guys can present me somehow like a good explanation of braking zones, and I think this is like one of the under thought about or like one of the more technical pieces. And I went on this deep dive, and I have been like going on this deep dive basically about. I saw that Bosch, the company, has this new anti-lock braking system that's they're putting on mountain bikes. But so it does beg the question though. It begs the question. It's like, why aren't we using anti-lock brakes in mountain biking to some extent? If they're good on cars or whatever, but like you totally understand different surface. There's a total number of factors. The immediate sort of response to that is to like F1 doesn't use anti-lock brakes, like because an expert braker in a car outperforms an anti-lock braking system. But it's interesting to see that they have this tech out there. It's probably going to sell. There's going to be people buying a $24,000 Specialized Levo and throwing on the anti-lock brake system on it. And you know what? You're not even going to have to ride your bike anymore. It's just going to ride for you. And you're going to be the fastest of all your friends. So that's one piece. That's why I've been going on this braking deep dive. But when we're talking about braking zones, and specifically let's talk about like a braking zone into a corner. Where is is there a generic braking zone into a corner, or is there like something you're thinking about going into the corner? Ross, like if you can break that down for me.
I wouldn't say generic, but I think my goal within braking is to not be trying to slow down beyond the point with which you initiate or tip into the turn, because that's when you roll onto the side of the tire and you create a slip angle. So it's, if you need to be slowing down, it's do that before that point. And then beyond that point, any braking is based around more managing of your brake or your speed rather than decelerating. That's kind of how I break it down. Because when you are braking to slow down, your body has to resist braking forces to prevent your body from moving forwards too much, and then it tends to sort of stiffen your body up a little bit. So when you're only managing, you can be a bit more free and you can move around and manipulate the bike a bit more.
Yeah, agreed. I love that. I love what you said about earlier. You mentioned something similar, but just quickly. And you said about Jackson getting off the brakes early enough, which I think, to answer your question, Rich, like brought it back to me, which is like, I think your average rider thinks about braking as, especially in relation to corners, as like, how late can I brake? Like, why everyone wants to think about like braking as close to the corner as possible and then getting off the brakes for the turn. For some reason, that's like lodged in people's minds as like, if I can do that, that's the best way to brake, because I have a zone that's as close to the corner as possible. Therefore, I'm not losing any speed before, and I'm getting off the brakes out, which in theory, I get it, because if you can brake that precisely in that small moment, you carry more momentum ahead of time. But in practice, 99% of people who ride bikes can't do that very well, or well enough that it's going to outweigh a less consequential version of braking. So I think for me, when it comes to braking zones, I completely agree with everything Ross said, but just like, I've been trying to get people to move their braking zone back, because then you can come off the brakes earlier for the corner, or ease off the brakes to be more managing rather than trying to slow down. Because then if you haven't braked as well as you wanted, you still have a bit of margin for error there before the corner, and you can still carry good exit speed. Whereas if your braking zone only starts up until the corner, you mess it up, that's the corner botched, more or less. So if you can move that braking zone back, you've given yourself a little bit of a buffer And I would encourage all riders, even like up to the level of like coming into the World Cup, to try that, because then you're getting into a positive cycle of good exit speed, and then you can like ease that back towards the corner after. But if you start by doing that, you're going to get your braking right more often, and you're going to see the successes of easing off the brakes for the turn. So that's my latest 2 cents on braking zones.
So what are the like definite, if there was 3 things definitely don't do, what are those 3 things when it comes to braking into a corner?
It depends what braking you're doing.
Right.
If say you're doing like a really steep switchback turn that doesn't have support on the exit, or like really good support, then for sure you're going to be trying to do your braking to slow down before the corner, but you're going to be doing a bunch of braking to manage and not allow the bike to just all of a sudden just pick up speed like a, scolded cat. And so you'd likely just be doing, I often say to people, think of your braking of each brake as being on a scale where 10 is the maximum you could squeeze the lever. But maybe a 2 out of 10 squeeze on either of the brakes does have good utility, because it does allow the wheel to roll quite freely, but it's not just completely no resistance. So it serves quite a good purpose for those sort of situations where it's not just a nice, beautiful berm. I think a lot of people, when they think about corners, they just think of it in the context that every corner has a similar feel to it or traction. So depends is the answer.
Yeah. I think if I was going to really simplify it, even one step back from corners and braking, I would just say, like a way I think of it is, braking when you're braking to decelerate or slow down is going to have force coming into your equipment and your body. And therefore, it's harder to move and adjust and steer the bike and do things you want to do. So any situation on the trail where there's force coming into you and your equipment, corner, rocks, big hole, etc., we don't want to be compounding that with braking forces,
Right.
more and less. So when you want to be active and you want your bike to be active, you should be lessening the forces of braking. And then when you can be more planted and strong in smoother sections between stuff, then you can add more braking forces, because you're not compounding forces that are coming externally with forces you're putting into the equipment.
Yeah, 100% agree. And I think as well is like when you see an opportunity where your brain is saying, I'd love to accelerate right now, that's absolutely when you're doing no braking. But unless that is the case, chances are you might even be like tiny bit of braking, but it's not necessarily the braking to slow down. It's braking to manage your speed and not have it pick up.